Position of power to be able to teach and to be able to train your children. Amen. Well, we've had two dynamic speakers come. Pastor Maceo preached our anniversary last week, and it was such a great time. It was definitely, he hit it and quit it, boy. I love, he don't need a long time. All he needs is about 15 and 20 minutes, and he can get you there where you need it. He's like I was about to say something, but that might take some of y'all back, but he's a good hit. And then previous to that, we had Pastor Ray come in and bless us, and that was such a great time. And many of you are still letting things go. If I hear another person say heifer, again, I know where it comes from because y'all felt that when he said he hated two people in his life, and both of them was his ex-wife. And a lot of y'all resonated with that for some reason. I don't know why everybody's like, yeah, I understand that. So I don't know what y'all got going on at home, but we want you to leave it at the altar and meet with God again for that. God told me as I was preparing for this message over the last few weeks, just listening. How many people just listen for God? Just listen. I encourage you to just listen. Listening is greater than talking. Many of y'all, when y'all pray, y'all talk too much. It needs to be more listening and less talking. Because when you listen, you can get directions from God and be able to move and operate in the way that he would have you to operate. I'm a church baby. I grew up in the church, and I've been to, I don't know how many services. I've been to. But you know when you go to revival, revivals always have the same thing. You about to walk into your, come on, say it loud. I know y'all done been there. You about to walk in, and it's just good when you about to walk. You don't know what season, but we about to walk into our season, and normally that season has what attached to it? Overflow. Yeah. You about to walk into your overflow season. Now, that's great. But before you go to your overflow season, there's a season that you're in right now. The Bible speaks in the Old Testament. He says that these prophets, they understood how to discern the times. And they were powerful because they knew the seasons and the times. They were able to identify it, and they were able to live in their season. It's hot outside in Texas during the summertime. And if you are only looking to the fall because you hate the heat, you will never be able to enjoy the summer. If it's wintertime and you love bundling up and you're like, man, I just wish it was winter forever, you will never be able to enjoy spring if you don't understand why each season is in your life. And so this morning's message is to give you the tools to be able to determine and define the season that you're in. Because when we can discern the season that we're in, we can enjoy the season without being impatient with ourselves to get to the next season. Oftentimes, and as we know this, the opposite of patience is anger. And if you're not patient, then you will be very, very angry. And some of y'all have been walking around angry because you are not understanding what God is doing for you. Somebody say, in this season. Every season is not overflow. Tell your neighbor that, hey, I know you went to the revival. I know all of the people shouted and cried and they did the little church dance. Every season is not overflow season. Some seasons are seasons of God bringing you out of something. Want to put a word on it? When God took the Israelites out of Egypt, he had to deliver them out of something, and it could be your deliverance season. A deliverance season is not overflow season. It's God bringing you out of something so that he can prepare you for your new season. You don't just go out of deliverance and go into your overflow season. In between deliverance and your promised land, according to the Israelites, there was a wilderness season. It took the Israelites a long time to embrace their wilderness season. It took them 40 years on what should have been an 11-day journey to understand that God had to put them in a wilderness season to prepare them for their overflow season. So tell them, say, hey, overflow does exist, but I have to make sure that I'm ready. God has to make sure that he's ready to give me my overflow. Because if I get my overflow before I get my training, then guess what? I'll kill. I'll destroy. I will mislead. I will fall because I'm not ready for my season of overflow. God is not a God that wants to see you to be crushed under the blessing, but he wants the blessing to be able to fulfill your life. He wants the blessing to come into your life and to give you more so that when he gives you more, he can entrust you and be able to expand your territory. To much whom is, much is. So I want to preach this morning on your wilderness season. You ready for this title? I didn't have the title until maybe 20 minutes before a service started. I was back there talking to the pastors, and I said, I don't have the sermon. I got the message, and I preached the message to them, and then I said, well, God gave me something in the midst. I want you to write this down. You can't get your next by worrying about your ex. I'm not talking about your boo. I'm talking about your season. I'm talking about everything that you can't get your next by worrying about your ex. I'm talking about your ex seasons, the ex things that you've been through. Ex means it's already been done. When you go bowling, you only see the X after you have done the strike. But if you're still looking at the scoreboard and it's your time to go, you won't be able to bowl your best because you're reflecting on what your last bowl was like. And God is saying that many of us, we have to let some things go in order for him to give us what's next in our lives. So I want to preach on the wilderness. The passage that I want to preach from is Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 2 through 6. Deuteronomy 29, verse 2 through 6. And it says, Moses summoned all of the Israelites and said to them, your eyes have seen all that the Lord did in Egypt to Pharaoh, to all of his officials, and to all his land. He said, you saw me bring y'all out of Egypt, deliverance season. He says, with your own eyes you saw those great trials, those signs and great wonders. But to this day the Lord has not given you a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear. Yet the Lord says, during the 40 years that I led you through the wilderness, somebody say wilderness, your clothes did not wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. You ate no bread and drank no wine or other fermented drink. He said, I did this so that you may know that I am the Lord your God. God puts you in the wilderness so that you can know that he is God. One of the commandments that he gives, he says, you shall have no other God before me. In Egypt, they had a Pharaoh, and it didn't matter what God said. Pharaoh was the person in charge, so they had to listen to Pharaoh. When God was ready to give them their deliverance season, he had to kill the Pharaoh and pull them out of Egypt. In the middle of the wilderness, there's two things that had to happen. They had to go between water, and they had to go through a wall. Between the water and the wall was their wilderness. Water, wilderness, wall. Say it with me. Water, wilderness, wall. All three are miracles. The water was a miracle. The wilderness was a miracle. And the wall was a miracle. In our normal mindset, if we knew that we had to escape by water, we would probably train swimming. We would probably wake up every day and maybe swim for a few hours and try to swim with stuff on our backs. And we would try to be able to grow in swimming because we know that in order for us to grow or get to the place where we have to go, we would train on how to swim. The problem with training on how to swim is that they never swam. So you would spend your time training for what you thought was going to happen when God was going to work a miracle. So God told Moses that when they got to the water, they felt like they were trapped between the Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea. He said, I want you to do one thing. He had to listen to God. When he listened to God, he raised his staff. And then when he rose his staff, a miracle happened. And what happened? The Red Sea parted. And it says they walked not on muddy ground, but they walked across on dry ground. Says when all of the Israelites got to the point that they were through the water, God then did something to the past. He did what? He washed it all away. They had already plundered Egypt. They had already borrowed gold from the Egyptians. They already had everything that they needed. So when God cleansed the Pharaoh and his army, Egypt as they knew it was never the same. But it's interesting that in the wilderness, they still reverted back to saying, in Egypt, it wouldn't have been like this. But in Egypt, it wasn't the same, because everything that they had experienced before was dead in the sea. How many of us are getting from our deliverance place that old girlfriend, that old relationship, that old job, the old way of living, all of that stuff that you experienced? Tap somebody, say, it's gone. And the moment that we can realize that that season of our life is over, God can now give us what we need for this new season. Tell them again, because they forgot. It's gone. Matter of fact, when you're talking to some people this week, you need to tell them, hey, bro, sis, it's over. That's gone. What are you doing now? I don't think we give much credit to our wilderness season. How many of y'all would shout and say, I'm in my wilderness season? Come on, stand. Come on, I'm in my wilderness. Pray, come on, Jesus. You about to walk in your wilderness. Why we don't hear that at the revival? I'm going to change. I'm going to start a revival. It's going to be called the Wilderness. How many of y'all going to come? We don't want to hear no wilderness. We want to hear overflow. We want to walk in abundance. But it's in the wilderness that God gives the blueprint for the rest of their lives. If you go to the book of Deuteronomy, you will see that in the book of Deuteronomy, that God in the wilderness, he gives the 10 commandments and the law that will govern their lives in the promised land. Well, God, why didn't you give it to them in the promised land? Because if they was already in the promised land, they wouldn't have had the training to be able to manage the promised land, which means that they probably would have destroyed the land that was promised to them. So God had to prepare them in the wilderness. The wilderness is a place. It's not a desert. It's not just sand. The wilderness is where trees and all these things are grown, and it's not area that has been developed. There's no concrete. There's no Chick-fil-A. There is no gas station. They're in a place that's undeveloped. So God takes them out of a place of prison, puts them in a place that's undeveloped so that he could develop them. He took them from a place where they knew how to get fish. They knew how to get food. They knew how to get all of these things. And he put them in a place where none of that stuff exists. And as they're on this journey and they're walking into the wilderness, 3 days they go without water, and they begin to grumble and say, Moses, why did you bring us out here? We could have died in Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die? And they got to a place of water because they're thirsty. They get to this water, and they're thirsty for water, but the water is bitter. God, why would you play tricks on me like this? Bring me out of a place where we might have been enslaved, but at least we had somewhere to sleep. At least we had shelter over our head. At least we had access to things. And now you bring us out here with all of these trees, and there's no water, and we're about to die of thirst. And then you will bring us to this, because remember, they were being led by fire by night and a cloud by day. Why would you bring us out here this far? And then, God, why would you bring me to this water that I can't drink? Kind of cruel, God. Will bring you to the ocean. You can't drink any other water. But then Moses hears from God. He seeks God in the wilderness, because in the wilderness is where you learn to depend on God. Write that down. It's in the wilderness that he trains you to depend on God. We don't shout about the wilderness, but it's in the wilderness where he does the work. That's why nothing's working the way it used to work in the wilderness. You're asking God, why? I'm trying this, I'm trying that, I'm trying this, I'm trying that. God, ain't nothing working. Why? What are you doing, Father? Have you forsaken me? And God is saying, yeah, that don't work, because that's not how I'm operating in this season. So he gets to the water that they can't drink, and they sitting there just salivating. They can't salivate because they don't have no water. They just with the dry mouth, lips ashy. You know, when you don't have no water, your lungs seem like they just dry. Moses hears from heaven and gives him spiritual wisdom, and he looks over at this piece of wood, and God says, throw the wood in the water. He's like, that don't make sense, because the water, that's dumb. How many of us have said some of the instructions by God was dumb? Just be honest. That's dumb. That don't make any sense. That's stupid. Maybe I'm tripping because I'm thirsty, so I'm not really listening to God. But he says, pick up this wood, and I want you to throw it in this water. And when he throws the wood in the water, he takes what was once bitter and he makes it sweet. But they had to listen and do the small thing right. So he takes what's bitter in the wilderness and shows you that he can make it sweet if you listen to the will of God, if you listen to the instructions of God. In the wilderness, he trains them. He says, take the wood, throw it in the water, and a miracle happens in the midst of the wilderness, and now they can drink. What was bad in your life, he pulls something sweet from it. So now when bad things happen, I don't have to look. That's where the term bittersweet comes from. It was bitter, but I heard God, and he made it sweet. I heard God, and he turned what was bitter and made it sweet. I heard God. Everything that's bitter in your life, I heard God, and he made everything that was bitter in my life, he made it sweet. But he had to listen to the instruction that was given. In this same wilderness, the place that we don't want to be, I told you he gave leadership. He gave them the 10 Commandments. He gave them the 613 laws that the Jews lived by. The things that were going to govern their lives, their diet, what they would do, how they would interact in marriage, how they would treat each other. He gave them everything that they needed to give them structure for their lives, gave them parameters so that they don't mess this thing up. Because I'm about to take you to a place of overflow, but I don't want you to screw up what you've got by being undisciplined. It's in the wilderness that you get disciplined. It's in the wilderness where you know where your help comes from. Because they're no longer relying on Pharaoh and his decision. They have to rely on somebody saying, God. So the people, after they got the water, they, thank you, God. You know how you do. Thank God for that. But now it's something else. Well, God, we're hungry. Our stomachs are touching our back. God says, I heard you. So he tells Moses, he says, Moses, early in the morning, I'm going to put this stuff on the ground. It's going to be called manna. And manna is called what is it? Because they don't know exactly what it is. But in some translations, they say it's bread. It's some type of substance to fill you up, right? So he goes in the morning. He tells his people, he says, early in the morning in the wilderness, God is going to feed us manna from heaven. Only get what you need for the day. This is powerful because in this capitalistic society that we live in, we want to know if we have enough for the lifetime. We want to make sure that we don't run out of nothing. But he says, only get what you need for today. But in the mindset of scarcity, in a mindset of lack of dependence, we will try to take more than what we're supposed to have. You can always tell kids that don't come from much. And then they walk into a restaurant and there's free peppermints. The kids that don't come from much will grab all of the peppermints they can. and put them in their pocket. How do I know? Because I used to grab a whole lot. 2 pockets full. Pockets just bulging when I walk out of Papa those. Just more matches than I need. Because it's free. And when you live in scarcity and lack, that anytime there's free stuff, we want to make sure that we get enough to last a lifetime. But the Bible says, give us today our daily bread. He's saying you're looking too far into the future. That's my job. Let me do my job. All you need to do is worry about today. Today I've sustained you. Today I've given you what you need for today. You look good today, but you're worrying about tomorrow when I paid your bills. I got you in transportation. All your phones are on. Your lights are on. You don't have nothing in the bank, but yet and still, you still got Chick-fil-A money. He says, I've given you what you need for today. Can you just enjoy today? And if we're honest, many of us can't enjoy today because we're always worried about tomorrow. It's in the wilderness that he gives us discipline. It's in the wilderness where he draws a circle around us and he says, I got you, for you can't do nothing about tomorrow. You can't do nothing about yesterday. He says, how many of you can add an extra hour to? How many of you can expand the sunlight? How many of you can expand the night? How many of you can? He says you can't, so don't do my job. Yeah, they didn't hear me next to you. Tap them and say, you can't do his job. Stop trying to do. You will run yourself ragged trying to do God's job. You're too limited. And God gave you limitations so that in the wilderness he could show you that it's going to be me who is going to take care of your every need. How many of you ate breakfast voluntarily? Maybe some of y'all didn't even eat breakfast because you don't eat breakfast. I don't eat breakfast in the morning. I don't have the appetite. But how many of y'all had the ability to eat breakfast? If you wanted to eat breakfast this morning, you could have eaten breakfast. Yeah. And how many of y'all would say, I'm broke? Go ahead, raise your hand. Some of y'all lying. I see. Y'all don't want to. But yet and still, I had access to what I needed. You may not have Galleria money, but that ain't a need. You might get shot in the Galleria these days. Galleria is the new Sharpstown. All my Houstonians know. Government start passing out that money and turn Galleria out, boy. Before the Galleria, you could go in there and now you better go in there with your sword. So they get the manna. Their stomachs are full. Some of the people with the mindset of scarcity grabbed more than what they were supposed to get. And it began to bring maggots, and bad things started happening in the camp. Moses was upset because they did not listen. In the wilderness, God teaches you, I need you to listen to what I'm telling you to do, because this is going to reduce your wilderness, or it's going to elongate your wilderness. You saying, I've been in this situation too long, and the question is, well, what you not listening to? We don't want to hear that part. That's not a revival message, but it is. It's a life-giving message that if we don't take the lessons in the wilderness, pass the test in the wilderness, then the wall will never make it to the wall. We'll never make it to the wall. So they get filled up on this, what is it, this manna. They like, man, this bread is cool. Like, man, back in the day, we used to have steak. We used to have all of this good food. Man, Egypt was good. Egypt is gone. But in our minds, Egypt is still thriving because they forgot that the Pharaoh died in the Red Sea. So their mentality or thinking does not line up with reality. Because in the wilderness, when we lack discipline and we go back to what it used to be without understanding what God is doing right now, our minds is living in a place that does not exist. Your ex wasn't that. Guess what? They your ex. But it seems like when you get away from him, you're like, man, it wasn't that bad. He just used to beat me up sometime. But we had more good days than bad days. She wasn't that bad. She just used to step out a few times. I mean, it wasn't. We start desiring the things that God, that we prayed, deliver us from this. Then he takes us out and puts us in the wilderness, and because we are undisciplined, because we have to let go of our ex to get our next, then we stay stuck. Looking backwards when God says that no man that puts his hand to the plow and looks back is... Come on and preach, Miss Brenda. She don't need a mic. Y'all here, you're not fit for the kingdom because you keep looking back at Egypt. When y'all friends start keep going back to, get out of Egypt, bro. Get out of Egypt. Get out of Egypt. What do you mean? You stuck. And if you're stuck in Egypt, you'll never get to the wall. I want to get to my wall. I want to get to my wall. I got to do whatever I need to do to get to my wall. 11 days, I'd rather go 11 days than 40 years. Matter of fact, I'd rather go 10 years than go 40 years. So I'm praying that today will expedite your wilderness. Paul said, I've learned to be content in all things, whether I have much or whether I have little. You know how he was able to be content? He had to go through his own wilderness. His wilderness was going into prisons. His wilderness was being shipwrecked. His wilderness was being blind. He had to go through some stuff. You talking about what you're going through? You could be in your wilderness. When you wake up tomorrow still in your wilderness, thank God. Say, God, you're trying to teach me something, and I want to learn it today. You become a student. Matter of fact, God says you ain't got to go to regular college. I've got college. It's in the wilderness. He takes what's undeveloped and he develops you in what's undeveloped because you're looking around you and none of this stuff makes sense, but yet God is still providing. And he still hears you in the wilderness. They're grumbling and complaining. I don't have this, and my husband's gone, wife's gone, this is messed up, and I got a job no more, and I'm living over here, and I'm doing this, and my car's messed up, and I'm riding the bus, and I'm on these things, and God hears you. He says, you know what? I hear y'all complaining. Y'all won't meet? God goes back and he speaks to Moses, and Moses speaks to God, and God says, hey, I hear y'all mumbling against me. Y'all want some meat? So in the morning, I'm going to give you manna. And in the evening, I'm going to give you quail. Now, this quail doesn't live in the wilderness. So he brings things into your atmosphere, into your sphere that shouldn't be there. How did that happen? How do I have more money than I know I didn't work as much? How do I have all of these things that God has provided me? Because he'll take things from the outside and import them into the place where you are so that he can show you that it's not that. It's not your hard work. It's not how good you are. It's I'm training you to be solely dependent upon me. So now they know how to turn bitter water good by throwing in a stick. He gave them a skill. They know that if I need something, I can cry out and God will hear me. They know that in the morning, I don't have to worry about my food because he is going to give me my daily bread. They know that in the evening time, we're going to have a good dinner because he's going to give us some quail. And although I can't see it at lunchtime, I know that when it's time for me to get what I need in that exact hour at 7 o'clock on the dot, God's going to show up. Before I go to bed tonight, I will eat something tonight. And the more that I can understand that God is going to supply all of my needs according to his riches and glory, then I can say, you know what? Let me be a little bit more patient with myself. Let me be more patient with God. Let me step back and stop being so anxious because I'm angry because I'm lacking patience with my season. Wilderness preaching. We're in the wilderness. So now they're walking through this wilderness and they're still getting direction from God. Moses is the one that goes to God for the people, and Moses goes and spends a whole lot of time with God. because he's trying to get the structure and the blueprint and the vision to bring back to the people. But the person that he left second in command didn't have the same connection that Moses had. So when Moses is gone, they take all of the stuff that they took out and say, we need something to follow. We need some direction. He still was feeding them. When Moses left and went up the hill to go get up the mountain to go get the 10 Commandments, God was still giving them manna. He was still giving them quail, but at some point it wasn't enough. Because in the wilderness, the enemy, yourself, will always come up with something that you need that you don't need. You will always create a need that you really don't need. You don't need that. But you saw somebody else, but you remembered that happened. So you've created a need that's not really a need. And in the midst of their need, creating a need, they develop this golden calf that they didn't need. That it was actually them working against themselves. Write this down: in the wilderness. In the wilderness, there were no enemies. And I'm gonna give you a long version. I'm gonna give you a paraphrase version. In the wilderness, there was no enemies. There was nobody coming for the Israelites. Everybody that was coming for them, they died. They didn't have anybody coming against them. Nobody was looking for them. Nobody was trying to take their territory. Nobody was hunting them. It was just them versus them in the wilderness. It's you versus you. Because God is telling you, I'll provide for you. But inside of you, you got this flesh and you got this spirit, man, and they're wrestling in the wilderness. And that's why you're uncomfortable, because this wrestling is happening. And God is saying you need to just let that thing go. Me versus me. God will start telling you little stuff to do that don't make sense, but you gotta do it. Because when you don't do it, you don't feel settled. You don't feel at peace. You don't feel comfortable with what's going on. You got to let that thing go. It's you versus you. How many of y'all is you versus you? And you know it. You identify. I'm in my own way. Everywhere I go, I got to tell Carlos, excuse me, can you, why you keep being in? I'm talking to him. You look schizophrenic. And sometimes it takes people outside of ourselves to tell us, like, you in your own way. What you don't want to do, God's telling you to do, and you've created yourself to be an enemy with God, and God is saying, I am for you. Why did you make me the enemy? The other thing that God does in the wilderness, first time he had the miracle with water. Second time they got to a place and there was no water around. There was no bitter water for him to throw the wood in to make it sweet, so they knew how to do that trick, but that didn't work anyway. And so it didn't work here because there was nothing. So they get to a place and they're like, man, we thirsty. Like, our lips ashy again. Our lungs is dry. God then has to go back to, didn't y'all see the correlation? Every time they get to a place that's tough, what does Moses have to do? He has to go back to God. So it's not just a once in a lifetime thing. You got to keep going back to meet with God. Because when you meet with God, he'll give you what you need. So they're looking around, there's no water. We're going to die out here in the wilderness. In the wilderness, you will always feel like you're going to die. Suicide will always be present in the wilderness. You don't believe me? Ask Jesus. Jesus was tempted in the... Come on, let's do a wilderness. Can we do a wilderness just a whole... It's in the wilderness where Jesus was tested and the angels showed up when he had this one-on-one dialogue with Lucifer. He was hungry and he was like, man, how you do this and that? So you will be tested in the wilderness. But guess what comes after the wilderness? The revival. So Moses talks to God and he's like, God, we stuck. We between the rock and the hard place. He said, good, strike the rock. What? Strike the rock. Does not make sense. Why do I have to call him? I ain't talked to this person in 30 years. Why do I have to call him and tell him I forgive them? Strike the rock. They did that to me at work. I shouldn't have to go back and say nothing to them. Strike the rock. I'm in the community. They didn't vote for me. They don't even like me. They stand against me. Why you want me to bring them something good? Strike the rock. My child is acting all kind of way when you want me to do what? Strike the rock. When you strike the rock, it never makes sense until after obedience set in place. Moses strikes the rock. He gives water to millions of people from the rock in the wilderness. It's more miracles happening in the wilderness. Matter of fact, the wilderness ain't that bad. But when we walk by sight, it always looks worse than what it really is. You need to write, it always looks worse than what it really is. Check this. Nobody died in the wilderness because of starvation or lack of resources. They only died because of disobedience. They never died because God didn't supply. They only died when they disobeyed God. Moses didn't make it into the wilderness because they got to another place and he did what he thought was old yesterday's message. He tried to bring it into today's message, and God is saying, what I told you yesterday was for today, was for yesterday. What I tell you today is for today. That's why he said, I will give you your daily bread. He wasn't just speaking about food. He's talking about your spiritual word. This time they got to the rock, God told him to speak to the rock. But he got frustrated, impatient, angry, struck the rock. And because he struck the rock, he never made it to the wall. Moses didn't make it to the other side. And now that we get to the scripture, at the end, he says, and all the while that they walked for this 40 years, which was supposed to be an 11-day journey, he said their shoes never tore apart. Their clothes never ripped off. They're in the wilderness without the resources to make new shoes and to make new clothes, but he allowed their clothes and their shoes to sustain the season. You don't have enough money for school shoes, but the school shoes you got look good. You don't have no money to buy new suits, but the suits that you got, they look good. You'll always create a need of something that you don't need. I looked in our closet this morning. I was like, man, we got too much. Sparkle was like, yeah, well, I need to start giving some of this stuff away. But when we get online, it seems like we always creating a need that's not a need. How much unnecessary stuff do we have in the wilderness? If you're honest, you got more stuff than you need. You got stuff in storage, and you ain't. You got stuff at their house, stuff over here, and yet you're saying, I ain't got what I need. Here's a nugget. If you ever gone to a 5-course meal or high dining, fine dining, in between each course that they bring out, they'll always bring you bread. The bread is not to fill you up, because if you had bread, you get full, you wouldn't pay for the meal. But the bread is not for you to be filled up, is to cleanse your palate so that whatever you eat next, you'll be able to taste it. So God takes the Israelites out of Egypt, gives them bread that they have to eat every morning. Every morning he's trying to take the taste of Egypt out of their mouth so that when they get into their season of overflow, that when they get to the promised land, that they'll be able to taste and see that the Lord is good, that they'll be able to taste the fruit of the land. They'll be able to taste the berries in the land. They'll be able to taste the milk and honey, that they won't be comparing what they had in Egypt, but the promised land will stand by itself. No more comparing to where it used to be. Now I can be present in the promised land and enjoy the fullness of God. So if he's got to give me manna until I get last year out of my mouth, if he's got to give me manna so I can get how I used to live out of my mouth, if he's got to give me manna until I can lose the taste of yesterday, then I will cleanse my palate so that I can prepare myself for the revival. It's in the wilderness that he takes all of the stuff that you know, the way of life, the things you did to provide for yourself, the stuff you used to sell, the stuff you used to do. He says, that's over. When you walk through the water, I washed away all of that stuff. That's why you got baptized, to cleanse all of that stuff away. Stop going back in your mind thinking about how it used to be, and be present in the now, because I'm working a perfect work in your season right now. It's in the wilderness that I will provide for you right now. So the moment that you go back, you got to put your feet down and say, God, help me live in the now. God told him, he said, I didn't open your eyes. I didn't give you the ears to hear. I didn't give you the vision to see this. That guess what? In those moments, I fed you. You never went hungry. I clothed you. Your clothes never wore out. I gave you shoes that will last 40 years. Louboutin can't give you shoes that'll last for 40 years. Gucci can't give you shoes that'll last for 40 years. Only God can give you those Jesus sandals that'll last for 40 years. It's out of Egypt that God delivered the Israelites. But it was in the wilderness that he gave them freedom. You can be delivered and not free. I know. Y'all know I used to love going down to the Golden Nugget. They knew me very well. Mr. Jones, good to see you back. Personal relationships with all of the dealers. High-fiving them, asking them about the kids and life. Telling them about Amazon and all this other stuff. Turo, talking to them. I had a connection with them, but when God said it's time to stop, there's still sunny days that I wake up and I say, man, I should just take a trip on down to the Golden Nugget. I'm delivered. But I'm not going to lie and say I'm free from it. And the moment that we can say I'm delivered, but I may not be free from it, then we can understand that I may be in the wilderness in this particular place of my life, that sometimes I desire strongly to go back to what I used to do. But God is saying, I'm trying to free you from it. And the moment we do good for a little bit, and then we wind up swimming back across that ocean to get back into Egypt. So it's a struggle, but guess what? I call my wife. I call people like, man, I sure feel like going down. Don't do it. I know, that's why I'm speaking it. That's why I'm telling you, because if I wrestle with this on my own, I'm going to disappear for a few hours and I'll be back. And that's how it is with sin. We disappear for a few hours and then we'll come back. And people know when you're missing. You think you're doing a good job. But what's done in the dark will always come to the light. The wilderness is the training ground on how to depend on God. It's the training ground on how to depend on God. I don't care what you're going through. The wilderness is where God trains you. It's your workout. It's your athletic period. It's your time of tutelage. It's your time to be able to work out all of this stuff that you have. He says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Guess where you do that? Not in overflow. You do that in the wilderness. And the moment that we can understand I'm waking up, it's another wilderness day, we can put our minds on that. When I played football and I knew that the next day I had hard work, I didn't dread that. I knew that it was something that was going to make me better, because I knew that when I got into the game, I wanted the scouts to look at me and I wanted to be victorious. So I didn't wake up and say, oh, Lord, here I go again. Another day that I got to go work out. Let me get this out the way and get this over with. No, I woke up in the morning with my mind focused that if I don't do this, then the person on the other side of that football is going to run me over, that receiver is going to catch on me. But I want to be in a position of power. I want to stand where my power is. So if my power is coming through my training, then I want to train well so that when I get on the field to play, I will do what God has called me to do. I can't say that I'm a victorious person, but I'm training like a loser. You can't wake up in the morning with a loser's mentality and train like a pro. No, you have to start in the mind first to say, I'm going to do what's required of me. Even when it gets hard, I'm going to push through it. We went and watched Woman King last night. And those women was training, and I was listening to Viola Davis, and she was talking about how much she had to train. She had to train like 7 hours a day doing martial arts, doing working and running and doing all of this stuff. In her 40s, she had to do all of this crazy stuff to be able to train. And she said, I feel like a bad person when not a bad person, but she said another word I can't use here on the pulpit, but she said that I feel like that because she put the work in to train. Don't spit on your training because you will reject your trainer. Mike is my trainer. He get me going. I can go in there with the mindset to complain, but I chose him to be my trainer for a reason. You chose God to be your God for a reason, because you know that they can get you somewhere to where you need to go. So don't step in your way by complaining about the work that you have to do. You don't have to go through this. You get to go through this. You don't have to wake up. You get to wake up. When you change your mind and you change your thinking, you can now rest in a place of power and sustainability that know that anything that happens to me today, God is going to supply everything that I need. Last point. Satan will feed you, but he will never fill you up. Satan will feed you lies. He'll feed you ideas. He'll feed you things. He'll feed you food. He'll touch on those places that you desire. He'll feed you as much as he feeds you. But guess what? There's always this insatiable thirst that will happen when Satan is feeding you. He will feed you, but he will not fill you up. There's only one person in this world that can sustain you and fulfill every need and every thought and everything that you have. He can quench every thirst. He can Come on, somebody. He's the only one that can give you more than enough that when you lay down at night, you can sleep at night and have peace at night. Satan will feed you, but God will fill you up. So no longer if I'm in the wilderness, whether I'm in Egypt coming out or whether I'm in the promised land walking around the wall, it doesn't matter where I am. I know that God will give me all that I need according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. So if you're in your wilderness season, go ahead and stand up. It's not the place to be ashamed. You in your training season. You in your season where God is breaking some stuff up. You in your season where God is getting you right. You in your season where God is stripping away some stuff. He's showing you only to depend on me. Thou shalt have no other God before me. You should have no other trainer, but I am. Yahweh. Somebody say, Yahweh is my trainer. Somebody say, Yahweh, train me. Break me down. Build me up. I get to go through my wilderness. I thank God for the wilderness. Wilderness is a good place to be. The scripture says this. He said, I will prosper them in every season. You can prosper in the wilderness. You can prosper in the promised land, and you can prosper in Egypt. Say, I'm prosperous. No matter where I am, what I'm going through right now, I am prosperous. Why? Because my trainer told me that I was. Thank God for the wilderness. Somebody put your hands together for the wilderness. The wilderness ain't that bad. It's a good place to be because it's in the wilderness that God can train you to get to the places that you need to go. God bless you.